Good evening. Hello, I'm Sharona. You are tuned in to The Extra Point, my weekly Friday night football program produced by the National Gridiron Network, www.nationalgridironnetwork.com. I tried to come to you live from the Pro Football Hall of Fame last weekend. I wasn't entirely successful because I did not have a very good internet connection, but I hope that you were able to enjoy a little bit of the show that we did from the Civic Center watching the Gold Jacket Pro Football Hall of Fame enshrinement pregame festivities. But I have good internet connection tonight, and I am so happy to be joined by one of my favorite Twitter personalities. Jason is here to talk to me about the Green Bay Packers, and we're going to give you guys a preview of tomorrow night's super duper exciting preseason game between the Green Bay Packers and the Tennessee Titans. I was talking to Jason a little bit about the Titans and the Packers have a kind of an interesting history. They've played each other a lot, mostly in preseason, although they have played each other in the regular season. Initially, the Titans very much, well, the record is going back to the Oilers' time. It's pretty even, as I recall, but from when the Titans came to town and became moved from being the Oilers, of course they were the Tennessee Oilers to begin with, and became the Tennessee Titans. The Titans had a little bit of an advantage, but boy, the last regular season game between the Green Bay Packers and the Tennessee Titans was in Green Bay. I was at that game. It was super duper cold, and the Packers put a beat down on the Titans that they have not forgotten. I was in the locker room yesterday, my first time. So excited to be able to say that the Titans have been very gracious to give me some access this year. And so my first time in the Titans locker room, we're talking about the game with Cody Sensabaugh. And Cody Sensabaugh, it was his rookie season. He has not forgotten it. He definitely remembers that game. I won't say that it's a payback game because it is preseason, but they have not forgotten. The Titans who are on that team have not forgotten, but it's two very different Green Bay Packers teams, and so I'm going to bring Jason in and let him introduce himself to you. He writes for the Acme Packing Company, which is a part of the SB Nation, which I have been and am very proud to still be a part of. They've asked me to write for their fantasy football news desk again this year. I'm very excited about that. Very grateful for that opportunity. So, Jason, come in and introduce yourself and give everybody that may not know a little bit of a background about where the Acme Packing Company name comes from.
Well, as Sharona said, I'm Jason Hirschhorn of Acme Packing Company. I'm the senior writer and editor there. And just jump in. You asked why it's the Acme Packing Company. The Packers were originally. I know you're aware, but the original sponsor of the football team was the Indian Packing Company, which was later purchased by the Acme Packing Company, and they were at one point known as the Acme Packers. That is the extent of the story. It's not terribly interesting, but that's why our website is known as Acme Packing Company.
I think it's actually very cool. The thing that, and I've been to Lambeau Field twice now, the thing that makes the Packers so special, and I have to say they're one of my favorite NFC teams. One of my best friends was born and raised in Green Bay. He now lives in Knoxville, Tennessee, which I cannot get used to saying because he was that quintessential Green Bay kid, but he lives in Knoxville, but still a Green Bay Packer fan. And I've gone to many of the games with him, and it's always fun to be in Green Bay and to be at Lambeau Field and the history and the tradition, all that stuff. I am such a sucker for that stuff. So I absolutely love it. And I love that the SB Nation community has that name. So Jason, thank you by the way for joining me. I really appreciate it. And you really are one of my favorite people to talk to and interact with on Twitter. You're very very good at what you do, and you do a great job for the Green Bay Packers. So the Packers they lost Aaron Rodgers to injury. It was a bit of a lost season in a sense for the Packers last year. Do you think that they've done enough this offseason? And I think it's okay to say that the defense last year was lacking.
Well, even before Aaron Rodgers went down, you had that dreadful defensive performance, especially in terms of pass coverage. Now,
Yeah.
a lot of that, too, was due to injury. I mean, they had just a plague of hamstring injuries that affected their defensive backfield and their linebacking group, Clay Matthews and Brad Jones in particular, and those linebackers. So they really had those issues prior to Aaron Rodgers going down, and it was going to be an Achilles heel for them in all likelihood. At the same time, though, at the time that Rodgers went down, it was Week 9 against Chicago. They were just coming off their best performance of the season offensively. They had played the Minnesota Vikings on the road and had scored on every single possession, save for the final one, which was the kneel-down drive. So they were really kind of hitting that next gear, and it really seemed like they were going to not only run away with that division, but potentially compete for a bye. And then obviously the Rodgers injury happened. He essentially missed 8 games. He came back in Week 17 to win the division, but at that point it was an entirely different team. Rodgers, while certainly better than Matt Flynn, Scott Tolzien, and everyone else that they were running out there at quarterback, was not what Aaron Rodgers has been. So getting that player back this season is going to make a huge difference. And as you mentioned, they've done a lot to revamp that defense, especially in the front 7. They lost a lot of their bigger, slower linemen. Ryan Pickett, who was that nose tackle the last couple of years, he's gone. Johnny Jolly also gone. C.J. Wilson, same thing. And they're going to run out of front 3 because it's a 3-4 defense of Mike Daniels, who was easily their best defensive player last season and possibly a breakout star in 2014. B.J. Raji moving back from end to the nose tackle. And we don't really know exactly who's going to be playing that other end spot. It could be Dayton Jones, the first-round pick in 2013. It could be any number of guys, Josh Boyd as well. They've brought in LaTroy Guion, but he's been injured, so maybe his opportunity to compete for that spot is gone. So question marks there. Now, if the defensive front 7 is improved, then that defense can take a humongous leap, because in 2012 they weren't a great unit, but they were a top 15 unit, which is something that you can compete with when your offense is as good as Green Bay's.
Yeah. It all really does start in the trenches. I was going to ask you about Jones, a guy that I really was high on coming out of UCLA. I had projected him because I thought that he was going to be so awesome in the Green Bay defense. I had projected him as a possible Defensive Rookie of the Year candidate. Well, let me ask it this way. Was his rookie season a disappointment?
Well, I wouldn't say so, mostly because you should never expect a defensive lineman, or really any kind of lineman, to be a great player year one. It is such a hard position to master at the NFL level. And Dayton Jones, while he had actually played in a 3-4 defense his senior year at UCLA, he was undersized for the position in terms of his weight. Usually a player like that, even on the lighter end, like let's say Cam Jordan with New Orleans, those guys are 285, 290. Dayton Jones, by the end of that season, he was playing in the low 270s. That's why you started to see him getting snaps at linebacker. I mean, he really needed to not just put on weight, but put on sustainable weight. And that's what they're hoping that he's done this offseason, and why he could make a big jump in 2014.
Yeah, and I agree with that, although I did feel like, because he had played a lot and had experience at a variety of positions, and was really, if you watch the film on him, he was so dominant, a lot of times in an underrated way at UCLA, but I'm expecting big things out of him this year. I do think that they're going to be much improved on the defensive side of the ball. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, they have good wide receivers. They invested several draft picks in additional wide receivers. Jarrett Boykin, I believe, is going to be a restricted free agent next year.
Correct.
So what is the sense that you're getting regarding the wide receiver position? And while you're talking about that, address the reports out of Packers training camp that Randall Cobb's not looking all that good.
Well, let's start with the draft picks that you mentioned. Under Ted Thompson, the current Packers general manager, they've made it a point to always surround Aaron Rodgers with quality weapons. It's something that Ted Thompson felt the Packers failed to do successfully back when Brett Favre was the starting quarterback through the 90s. Thompson was an assistant at that time. So it's really been a focus of his draft, which is why you always see him spending draft picks on receivers when they don't necessarily need them based on their current depth. When Greg Jennings was a second-round pick, they still had Driver and several other good receivers. They didn't necessarily need him. Same thing a couple of years later with Jordy Nelson. Same thing with Randall Cobb. And now most recently, Devontae Adams, Jared Abbrederis, and Jeff Janis, the three this year. So it's really just stockpiling, pass catchers. It's something that they feel that they need to do in order to maximize that offense. In terms of the current depth, they have at the top Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb, as you mentioned. Behind him, Jared Boykin, though those three are really going to be the starters. They run three wide very often. And Devontae Adams is the one guy who has a chance to contribute in some sort of significant way in 2014. He was the second-round pick. He led all of college football in a number of areas, I believe targets, catches, and receiving yards.
He's a very exciting player.
He absolutely is. And while he's not a burner, he is so athletic in terms of his ability to high point the ball and snatch it. He had a 39.5-inch vertical, which is tremendous. He almost reminds me of like a Chicago Bears receiver, like Alshon Jeffrey or Brandon Marshall, guys who aren't incredibly quick but are so physical and are so good at going up and getting the ball that they'll win those jump ball situations. Basically like basketball players. That's something that they're hoping to bring into that offense because while they've had good wide receivers for as long as Rodgers has been there, that sort of dimension is something that they haven't really had before. Now, you mentioned Randall Cobb in the reports out of training camp. Now, I will point out that Randall Cobb has not exactly blown up the page in his previous training camps, and it's more to do with his position. Now, you can say he's a wide receiver, but what he really is a slot receiver. In 2013, he played 94.7% of his snaps from the slot. The years before that, he was playing over 80. He's so exclusively a slot receiver that position just doesn't necessarily get big plays in training camp. It can lead to it in the regular season, as we've seen with Randall Cobb before. I mean, that touchdown catch he had to beat Chicago in Week 17 was from the slot, so you can definitely see that happening in games. But in training camp and practice, it's not necessarily something that's going to flash, so I wouldn't be too terribly concerned about Randall Cobb at this point.
I was curious about that because, look, training camp is useful for certain purposes, but they're in pads, it's camp, guys are going to come in a little rusty, they're going to have to shake off the rust. Really, when you start to evaluate not even the first preseason game, I don't know that you can formulate too many lasting conclusions. Now, you can get an impression, but, it's the first time that they're back in a semblance of game speed and in a game environment, and they're going to be miscues, there are going to be all kinds of things, they're going to be running vanilla things, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. I had got a chance to listen to Ken Wisenhunt talk about the Packers game yesterday, so I wasn't terribly concerned about it, but I wondered if maybe you had a little bit of inside information, because he's a guy, he's talented. He's from Kentucky, so we're familiar with. He almost went to Tennessee. Tennessee fans are very familiar with that situation. So I wasn't terribly concerned about it, but I didn't know if that was overblown or was just something that he just take in stride and expect that he's going to be as good as he's always been. But he's had some injuries, and he's not still struggling with injuries, is he?
No, the injury that cost him 10 games last year was a broken leg. That's completely healed. I mean, he was completely healed probably by March, so he's definitely fine now. The little injuries that he's picked up, he missed one game at the end of the 2012 season, a little time during the 2011 season, that being his rookie year. The only significant injury, though, was the one last year, and while a broken leg is certainly not unimportant, it's also not the kind of injury that you're usually concerned about having a repeat event. So in all likelihood, Randall Cobb is going to be fine. But in terms of how he's looked in camp, I would say it's far too early to say one way or the other that he's going to have issues or he's not going to have issues.
Now, we both mentioned Jarrett Boykin. He's a guy, Aaron Rodgers really likes Jarrett Boykin and has talked very highly of him. And when Rodgers was playing last season, looked for him. Boykin had, and so did the backup quarterbacks as well. I mean, he really had a pretty nice season last year. What do you think that you can draw any conclusions from the Packers drafting so many wide receivers in regard to Boykin's status?
I don't think that there's too much to read into it as it relates to Boykin. You can maybe make a parallel to Randall Cobb or you maybe Nelson prior to his extension. Boykin was a guy who was the sixth receiver in 2012. He made the team as an undrafted free agent. Actually, a guy who got cut by Jacksonville, if you can
Yeah.
believe it. And didn't really play much until the Packers started to have injuries, which was really the story of 2013. I mean, he had absolutely no catches prior to the game against Baltimore. That's the game where both James Jones and Randall Cobb went down, and that's when he had his 43-yard catch, and that really led to more things for him. He had a 100-yard game the next week, and he just kept going. I mean, if you take his stats and you extrapolate that to what it would have been if he was starting for a full season, that's a guy who's right around 1,000 yards. So you can really be productive in that offense. Now, as I mentioned earlier, he's basically going to be a starter if he's the number 3 receiver because they tend to go too wide with Randall Cobb in the slot. Now, there's a chance that Devontae Adams is going to usurp that spot, and that's one of the things I'll be looking for in the first preseason game against Tennessee. But if he's there, I expect him to have a pretty productive year because he's shown not only can he make good plays after the catch, but he can make some tough catches too.
What is the situation with the tight ends? It does not seem like, Jermichael Finley has been to Green Bay, but that's probably more of a personal issue than anything else. Is there interest there? Is Jermichael Finley going to be a Packer at any point? And if not, what about Quarles? And I believe Bostic is the other guy.
Corliss, Bostic, Richard Rodgers, the third-round pick. But let's start with Finley. As it stands, it does not appear that Jermichael Finley is going to be a part of the Green Bay Packers. They actually kept his number and his nameplate for his locker until about the start of training camp, and at that point they took it down, which suggested that they probably moved on.
Right.
And things are getting more complicated for Finley because it doesn't sound like he's actually going to be able to claim insurance money for his injury.
I read that article that you guys did. Yeah.
So, I mean, he really, in all likelihood, needs to play because he's not going to get any more money if the insurance company claims that he's not totally disabled and he has a total disability insurance policy. So if he's going to get playing time, it could be with the Patriots, who worked him out after his neurosurgeon cleared him, but I have a hard time seeing it being Green Bay at this stage. In terms of who's likely going to play there, I mean, that's one of the biggest mysteries of the Packers offseason. Corliss is the incumbent. He's the guy who played down the stretch, but he's more of a number 2 tight end. He's not a great guy. He's a guy who's good at blocking, good at receiving, but not great at any of them. Brandon Bostic is a guy they've been slowly developing. He was a wide receiver at Newberry College, a Division III school, but they've built up his body. He started to show flashes last year, which was his first on the 53, and now he's going to get a chance to compete for that starting job. And on top of that is a third-round pick, Richard Rodgers, the tight end out of Cal, which if you talk to the people who cover camp, they think he's going to get a legit shot for that starting job because he has the best hands of those tight ends.
Now, the Packers, I wouldn't say that they raised eyebrows because he was undrafted, but they took a shot on a tight end with a little bit of a troubled past. What is the situation there, and is he going to make the roster?
Well, I should say prior to his injury, he had a chance, but it was by no means a good chance. Now he has a leg injury. It sounds like he might miss all of training camp and perhaps all of the preseason. If that's the case, I don't see how he's making that 53. I mean, they could put him on IR potentially and stash him for a year. But to be perfectly honest, I didn't consider Colt Aiello to be this tremendous tight end talent even before the injury. And ignoring all the off-the-field issues for a second, while he is tremendously athletic, he was not particularly hard worker. That's why he had one of the lowest bench press numbers at the combine for his position. And he's also a guy who was never really broke out at Oregon. You'll have a couple of good plays here and there, but he didn't put it together consistently. So he seems like one of those guys who, while seems to have everything you'd want from like a genetic standpoint, just is never going to put it all together. So considering that the Packers have at least 2 tight ends they like better than him in Bostic and Corliss and a third-round pick in Richard Rodgers, it's going to be really hard for him to fight for that team, even if he does return to the practice field.
How many tight ends do you think they'll carry this year?
Well, I should say my original 53 projection had them keeping 3. I'm starting to rethink that because I'm not sure they're going to keep 6 receivers anymore, and that has to do with Jared Abbrederis' injury. All we're doing is talking about injuries. But I would say 3 or 4. The fourth is going to be a guy who contributes on special teams, which is why I think that'll probably be Ryan Taylor, the tight end
Mm.
from North Carolina. He's going to his fourth season. And the reason why I think they lean towards him is not only because he's a very good special teams contributor, he's the backup long snapper. So if something were to happen to Brett Good, who's the current long snapper, they'd at least have themselves covered there.
I gotcha. Well, good stuff about the. I think I had forgotten that Colt had a leg injury, or maybe I just missed it somehow. I was a little bit. When did that happen?
That happened less than a week ago, so it's not something
Okay,
that
it
we
was
yeah,
probably while I was in Ohio.
yeah, I would imagine it was right around the same time.
Yeah, okay. All right, awesome. Well, let's talk. Let's get a little bit into the preseason game tomorrow night. I had an opportunity to hear Ken Wisenhunt, new Titans head coach, Ken Wisenhunt, talk a little bit about the game, and he's and so I mean he's really is sort of the quintessential Tennessee Titans head coach. I'm really it's really kind of fun to watch. He talks, but he doesn't reveal a lot. And obviously, he's been in the league for a long time, and so he's got that. He's a very personable guy, but he's got that coach speech down. But he had indicated that he had not talked to the Packers as of yesterday about what they plan to do, and so they really hadn't formulated any sort of set kind of, and I know that coaches do get together a lot of times and talk about what they're going to do. I expect that the Titans are going to be very vanilla in what they do. He had indicated earlier that the starters might play about 15 snaps, but he wasn't willing to really commit to that yesterday. I suspect that they're going to watch and see how the starters perform in the first plays that they do. Has Mike McCarthy come out and said anything about what he's planning to do?
Well, Mike McCarthy hasn't, but Aaron Rodgers has, and
Oh,
it does not sound like it doesn't sound like it's going to be a long run for him. I mean, he may only get that first series, and that's it. And that's what they've done the last couple of years. They just
yeah.
don't like to expose the really valuable veterans
Well,
for
it's
for
smart.
the pre. It is smart, especially in the first preseason game. I mean, I would expect Rodgers to play the first series, maybe throw the ball once or twice, and then get out of there. Now, they might keep the starters in besides him for longer. I wouldn't be surprised if they have that starting offensive line for as much as the whole first quarter, because in addition to bringing back Brian Bulaga, who missed the last year and a half with various injuries, they're also bringing in a new center, J.C. Treader. So it might be a good
Yeah.
opportunity to really get him acclimated to the NFL game, because while they like him a lot, he was a fourth-round pick a year ago, he's a converted left tackle, so it's a position that's still fairly new to him. They want to give him as much exposure as possible.
Thank you for reminding me, and I did mean to ask you about the offensive line, and I completely slipped my mind. An area that's been troubling for the
Oh, to say the
Packers.
least.
Yeah, just I'm trying to. Yeah, and I'm like, what word am I looking for? I didn't want it horrible. No, troubling for the Packers for really a couple of years now. Are they getting better there?
Well, if you ask Mike McCarthy, the answer is yes. He believes that this could be the best offensive line during his tenure in Green Bay. And they've actually had some good offensive lines going back to the earlier years. 2007 was the last year that I would say they had a really strong offensive line. That was the Brett Favre's last year in Green Bay when they went to the NFC Championship game. I don't know that it's going to be that good, but they might be a little better than at least they've been in the past couple of seasons. David Bakhtiari is going to his second year as the starting left tackle, and for offensive linemen in general, that second year is when you see that big jump. He was fairly good in pass protection last year, a total sieve in the run game, but if he can improve on both fronts, he could become an above-average left tackle. They bring Brian Bulaga back, and he looks just spectacular in training camp in
Oh,
terms of
that's
his
good.
one-on-one. His one-on-one competition, his just ability to move side to side, which is some of the issues that you wonder if he's going to have, given that he's torn his ACL and had a hip injury earlier. It's really now just a question of what is J.C. Treader going to be as a starting center? And, he's been up and down in training camp. Early on, he was getting beaten by the defensive lineman in one-on-ones. He's kind of recovered a little bit, but again, you really won't know until he's out there on the field.
Yeah. All right. So, and you wouldn't expect Aaron Rodgers. I think and the Packers are a smart team. They're a very well-run organization. I have so much admiration for them as a team and an organization. You would expect that they would protect their $100 million man, so to speak. And Aaron Rodgers he's a vet. He's He knows the game. He doesn't really need to play a whole lot in the preseason. But on the other side of the ball, for the Tennessee Titans, new coaching staff, they're converting to a completely new system. They're trying to get a feel for their players. Although I think that they have a good idea who they want to start, who they want to have, in certain situations, but still it's all so very new. I think that you can expect to see them because they will want to get that evaluation. I don't know. I was listening to Coach Wisenhunt talk and thinking back, and I am not. I'm not ashamed to say that I didn't really follow the Cardinals all that closely when he was their head coach. So I didn't really remember, what kind of philosophy that he used, and I didn't go back and look. I don't know that they're going to play more. Maybe the first quarter. I would be shocked if they played beyond that, and I definitely don't expect to see any of the starters on the field in the second half. Although I will say the kicking situation is very much of a concern, and he was not committed to saying that one would play more. I mean, I think they're going to try both of those guys out, and they should, because they've got a situation on their hands where they've got to figure out what they're going to do with their kickers. They've got a guy, Macon Bonani, who is from Brazil, a soccer player, has an incredible leg, can kick the ball to Hong Kong, but his accuracy is lacking. And then they have Travis Coons, who's a rookie college player that they signed as an undrafted free agent. He's very accurate, but probably can't kick it past the 30-yard line, maybe the 20. I mean, you get him backed up. So, if you combine those two guys, you've got a pretty good kicker, but I don't know what they're going to do there. And so they're going to have to figure something out there, and I really think that they are going to want to get a look at those guys. And then, on the defensive side of the ball, they've got some competition, particularly at that right cornerback spot. They might play, some of those guys a little bit more. You might see a guy like Bleedy Ray Wilson, who is competing with Cody Sensabaugh for that right cornerback spot that's vacated by Alteron Werner going to Tampa Bay. So, you've got some individual spots where you might see guys play a little bit more. And we're talking about young guys, too, not veterans like Aaron Rodgers. Do you envision a scenario where a guy like Dayton Jones or some of the other younger players might play a little bit longer?
Well, in terms of all of these issues, whether they be on the side of Green Bay, Tennessee, or another team, the general question you need to ask is, what purpose does it serve? Playing Aaron Rodgers for a quarter in a preseason game doesn't really serve a lot of purpose to his team. Whereas if you have a competition or an improving player or things you need to figure out, so in Tennessee's case, a new defense and battles at cornerback, that's something they're going to give more time to because it serves a purpose. Mm-hmm. You need to find out which one of those players is better able to contribute this season. So I would expect Tennessee to stick with the starters a little longer on defense than they would have otherwise, just because it's a new scheme. They're not going to maybe throw things at Green Bay that they don't want to put on tape yet, but in terms of just being able to figure out who's assignment sure, who has the better instincts, those are the things you can figure out now in the preseason. So I would expect to see them or tomorrow, because that's when the game is. As for Green Bay and their young players, I expect them to play a lot. Dayton Jones, he may not play into the second half, but I would not be surprised if you're seeing him taking snaps as late as midway through the second quarter. It's because they need to see what he is now that he's remade his body. He's added weight. He reported to camp just under 290. It's a much better size for him, given that he's playing that 5 technique or the 3 technique position in their 3-4. They're going to give him more snaps. Same thing for Josh Boyd. Same things for a lot of their young players. The safety's also probably going to get a lot more burn because they don't really know who they're going to go with. Now, Morgan Burnett, the one guy who's almost certainly going to be a starter, isn't even in Tennessee right now because he has an injury. So they're going to be running out HaHa Clinton-Dix, the first-round pick, and Micah Hyde. The two are competing for the same job. But they're going to play together in this game. We're also going to take a look at Sean Richardson, who's a third-year player, an undrafted guy who has really come on. He also came back from a kind of scary neck injury. And they want to see if he's a guy who can maybe not be a starter, but can play in certain sub packages, like really come into the box and be almost like an extra linebacker, but still with some coverage ability. You're going to see things like that because, again, it serves a purpose for his team.
Right. I was going to ask you when we were talking about the team, this is a good time to bring it up. Jonathan Franklin, it's just an incredibly sad situation with him, his injury preventing him from being able to play football anymore. He's a great kid, just an incredible person, and you get the sense that he's going to be okay in life. He's going to do fine. Does that or did that change the way you think that the Packers are going to use their running backs? Because he struggled a little bit last year, and it did look like it was going to be Eddie Lacy and James Starks.
Yeah, it was going to be Eddie Lacy and James Starks as the 1-2 punch pretty much regardless, but Franklin was going to have the chance to make an impact on returns and possibly also as a change of pace back on offense. Because whereas, Eddie Lacy is a between the tackles runner, he's hitting that A gap and that B gap most of the time, and James Starks kind of the same thing. Franklin is almost like a Ray Rice type in his, when he's at his best. A guy who can do that, a little bit of that too, but also, catch a swing pass, do a lot of those screen things. And they don't, that was a part of their offense that they're never going to really be able to develop because with him gone, they don't really have another proven running back that has shown they can do that. Juwan Harris is a guy they're going to take a look at. He showed a little bit of that at the end of the 2012 season, but it's far too small of a sample size to say whether he can do that on a consistent basis. They have rookies, one of which I know you're very familiar with, Rajon Neal, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, Rajon Neal.
Yes, the mustard. And
I was kind of trying to move into that little...
Oh, by all means, go ahead.
No. I want to hear from you, and then I'll talk a little bit.
But yeah, so he really was almost a different kind of tool in their toolbox at the running back position, and they don't really have anyone right now who stands out as a replacement.
Yeah, Rajon Neal, I really liked him at Tennessee, and I was disappointed that he did not get drafted. I can't say... Yeah, maybe a little bit surprised. I think that he might be a little bit underrated in terms of what scouts and teams think about him. Have you heard anything about him in training camp? And what appears to be the thought process from the Packers in regard to him and some of the other guys that you mentioned?
Well, he has looked good in training camp, but I'll say that with the caveat of usually running backs look good in training camp because it's usually not tackling to the ground and they're just running through, and it's easier if you're running back to look better. Mm-hmm. Now, they're probably going to keep 4 total running backs, counting the fullback. 3 of those spots are already taken up with Eddie Lacy, James Starks, and John Kuhn. So there's really only one open position. Now, is it going to be Juwan Harris? He has the added ability to return kickoffs. They're certainly going to try him out there. If he looks good returning kickoffs, I think they're just going to say, you know what, this way we don't have to expose Randall Cobb or Micah Hyde there, and we saw enough of him in 2012 and in this preseason that we feel comfortable with him as our third halfback. Let's take him on, but it's not a guarantee. Mm-hmm. If he isn't the guy, I would expect it to be Rajon Neal because he definitely fits the mold of what they like from that halfback position. He's a bigger guy.
He's like Eddie Lacy in a sense. Not quite Eddie Lacy, but he's a hard runner between the tackles kind of guy.
He's hitting those A gaps and those B gaps, and he's a one-cut runner. He's not a guy who does a lot of dancing, and that's what they like in Green Bay. So he definitely fits the mold of what they're looking for. But again, is he going to have the opportunity? Now let's assume that he does not make the 53. I would not be surprised if they were to give him a spot on the practice squad because injuries at those running back positions, they happen very frequently. And as we've seen with Eddie Lacy going back to college and with James Starks, these are not guys who you expect to play full seasons. And it would not entirely surprise people if they at some point were knocked out for the season. That's when it's nice to have a guy like what Rajon Neal appears to be to come off the practice squad. And, you're not going to be Eddie Lacy. You're probably not going to be James Starks. But to be competent and be able to run the offense the same way they have been running it, I think that's what they like about him.
Yeah, to be able to do a plug-and-play kind of player where he fits that skill set and they don't have to change anything. So, yeah, I'm happy to hear that he's doing well there. So, do you think that the Packers, are they out there on their whiteboards or on their little iPads, cooking up plays, game planning for this game, or is it just going to be a vanilla?
Absolutely not. No, it's going. It's going to be very basic skill. And that's not Green Bay in particular. That's pretty much every team in the
Right.
league. I mean, it's very rare that you see coaches put their best stuff on tape in the preseason because
Yeah.
there's no benefit to it. It's not like this game, if they win or lose it, is going to matter. And by putting it on tape, it's something that other teams can prepare
Right.
for come the regular season. So, again, does it serve a purpose? And for Green Bay and every other team, the answer is going to be no.
It's really just an acclimation process, and the first couple of preseason games anyway. Now you'll start to see a little bit more installation of things as you get toward that fourth preseason game. And I can't remember, maybe you probably know this, Jason. Are the cuts before or after that fourth preseason game this year?
The cut down to 53 is after the fourth preseason game. There's a cut down to 75. I think that's after the third, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, okay. So cuts start between the third and the fourth, and I think that's the way it was last year too. And really, you don't start to see any installing until after that first cut period, and then you'll see a little bit more. So, all right. So we've talked a little bit about Rajon Neal, and I know that there are some other guys. Let's talk about the back end of the roster some more, because that's really what, if you're a hardcore fan of the game, or if you write about the teams, or if you write about the sport in general, that's where the emphasis is in the first couple of games anyway. So the back end of the roster, who are some guys that you've got your eye on, that you think are making noise in camp, maybe some unknown guys that our viewers out there might not know about?
We'll actually start with one of the quarterbacks. Now, the Packers, for the last several years, have only kept two quarterbacks on the active roster, but then after the catastrophe that was the backup quarterback situation last year, they're going to really consider keeping three. And that means that one of the players on the bubble is Scott Tolzien. He actually started a couple games last year for Green Bay. He's going to get a lot of playing time tomorrow. He's a guy who is not necessarily competing with Matt Flynn for a spot. He's competing with players from all across the depth chart to get that 52nd or 51st spot, and try to be a third quarterback, because it's really going to take a lot for them to keep three. But they also are not going to be in a position, if they let him go, they're going to look at having the two guys at the top, those being Rodgers and Flynn, and I don't think Chase Reddick, their undrafted free agent quarterback, is going to make the practice squad. So if he doesn't make it, that third quarterback on the practice squad is going to be someone not currently in the organization. Looking at other positions, I could see Joe Thomas, not the Browns left tackle, the Packers inside linebacker. He's a guy who's really flashed in camp. And inside linebacker is a position where, for the most part, they're not high draft picks. A.J. Hawk, the lone exception, but he was picked in an entirely different defense and was moved inside. Though you look at the guys that they have at the top of the depth chart now, Brad Jones, the 7th-round pick, Jamari Lattimore was undrafted, Sam Barrington was another 7th-round pick. So those guys are really coming from the back of the draft, or not even in the draft. And Joe Thomas is one of those guys who has a chance to be that next guy in, so that maybe he either makes the team this year or comes on the practice squad.
Let's talk a little bit about Sam Barrington. Interesting path to the NFL, to say the least. Are you at all concerned about some of the hiccups that he's had along the way?
Not terribly, because he's been more or less a model citizen in Green Bay, and he's really been one of the guys that the coaches like a lot, both for his on-the-field and off-the-field leadership. So I'm not sure what it was when he was younger that was causing all those issues, but since he's been in Green Bay, the only issue he's had is injury.
All right. Well, extremely good stuff. I was going to ask you about the quarterback situation, and so I'm glad that you went ahead and addressed that. For the Titans, some guys to keep an eye on, and I just wrote, I think probably he's, barring something unexpected, I think Derek Hagan is going to make the Titans 53-man roster. I just did a little short feature on him. If you get a chance, check that out. Great guy. And let me just give you, I go to camp, and I don't always get that first roster. They'll hand out rosters at training camp and stuff, and I don't always get it because I've got a camera in one hand, my phone in the other hand. I'm taking pictures with both and tweeting and doing all of this stuff. So the first day at camp, I'm watching, and I just start remembering guys by numbers. And so I'm like, 80 just made a nice play, and there's 80 again, and I'm like, and I'm like snapping pictures of him and stuff. And so it took me a few practices before I actually figured out who number 80 was, and then I had a little bit of a break from training camp because I went to Ohio and covered the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And so I go back, and Derek Hagan's name is on everybody's lips, and I'm like, hey, that's the guy that I've been watching, right? And so I got a chance to talk to him in the locker room. He's such a great guy, so be sure to read that. Another guy that keeps catching my eye is an undrafted free agent, and I apologize, I forget where he played. I should have my roster here. Hakeem Smith is a safety, number 38. He is another guy that just keeps making plays, and every time I turn around, I'm like, there's 38 again. And so really, really an interesting guy, and there's some opportunity at the safety position. Obviously, the first three spots should be pretty well set. You've got Michael Griffin at the free safety spot. Bernard Pollard is going to play strong safety. Those guys have interchanged a little bit under the past coaching staff. I have not seen them do that in training camp. Not that they haven't, I just haven't personally seen it. So I'm kind of anxious to see if they do any of that this year. George Wilson, great veteran guy, great guy on special teams, can come in, really getting coverage. He's smart. He knows where he needs to be and what he needs to do. I think, would be a virtual lock for that third safety spot, but they're probably going to keep 4 safeties. Maybe there's a 5th guy that's a guy like a Khalid Wooten is now being listed, I think, as a safety, although he was listed as a cornerback. They've got some guys who have the skill set to play safety or cornerback. Khalid Wooten, they've got Damian Stafford, one of their draft picks from last year. Those guys are going to get some opportunity to play a lot, and I think especially in this preseason game tomorrow night against the Green Bay Packers, and they're going to be tested, and this is the exciting thing. Now, I know Aaron Rodgers isn't going to play a lot, but I expect that they're still going to throw the football because that's part of their game. Do you think that they're going to hold back at all because it's going to be a Matt Flynn or a Scott Tolzien?
No, when those guys are in, keep in mind they're also going to be playing in all likelihood with those receivers. They're trying to figure out who's going to
Right.
fill up that depth chart. When it's if it's Matt Flynn, his receivers are Devontae Adams, 2nd-round pick, Jared Boykin, those guys. They want to see what those guys can do. So I think it actually behooves them to try to pass more in the situations because in terms of the running game, they kind of already know what they have. Eddie Lacy,
Right.
you already know. James Starks, same thing. The receivers after the top 2, that's where you start to get those question marks. Is Devontae Adams or Jared Boykin the better number 3 receiver? They can find that out with Matt Flynn there because even though Matt Flynn is an Aaron Rodgers, he knows the offense so well that he can kind of emulate that to a degree where they can figure out who's better for their offense, Devontae Adams or Boykin. So I think they are going to pass a fair amount after Rodgers is out. When Rodgers is in there, it's just going to be perfunctory because they feel that they have to put Aaron Rodgers out there to please, Goodell and whoever else. But he's not going to be in there for long, and I don't think.
To be fair to the fans, they should get to see Aaron Rodgers throw a pass.
Yeah, and then he can go to the sideline, put on his hat, and wave at people.
Right. The Titans are in a little bit of a similar situation at their quarterback position. They had carried 3 quarterbacks, with Rusty Smith being that 3rd guy, for a while, and it was almost like, because Rusty saw the field once or twice, and poor guy got thrown to the wolves against the Houston Texans one year. That was awful. I felt so bad for him. But with Jake Locker's injury history and Charlie Whitehurst, and Charlie Whitehurst has had moments where he's looked really good in training camp. He's thrown a few interceptions here lately. That's they all have. That's a little bit concerning. But they've got Zach Mettenberger. Man, he's a guy, a lot of scouts, a lot of people were very high on him. And, especially if he looks good in preseason. And he's looked at times very good in camp. He's not a guy that I would think that they would want to risk putting on their practice squad because I think that there is a decent chance that somebody would snap him up. So I think that you're going to see them, testing their backup quarterback situation to see how it is. Now, I know Ken Wisenhunt likes Charlie Whitehurst. And he
loves Charlie Whitehurst.
Yes. Well, what's not to like? He's got the hair. He could be a movie star, right?
Charlie
Um,
Whitehurst has made a fantastic career out of holding a clipboard, and
I mean, right? Yeah,
look, I'm not criticizing
I'm
him.
not
I'm
hating. No,
jealous. I want to
right?
know his secret.
Yeah, I mean, don't hate the game, don't hate the player, hate the game kind of thing. No, I'm not hating on him at all. But having said that, he's played like 13 games in a 9-year career, and so you're gonna want to know what you've got behind him. And so I do think that the Titans will probably carry 3 quarterbacks this year. Not a fan of that, but I totally understand it because of the situation, that they're in. And let's face it, Zach Mettenberger fits the Ken Wisenhunt mold for a quarterback. So,
And that makes total sense. And look, Zach Mettenberger, had it not been for that ACL tear, was going to be a day 2 pick. So he really is a guy that the teams around the league like. It's just a lot of teams felt that they were going to draft a quarterback. They wanted someone that they could use this season or could potentially play this season. Now, Mettenberger is apparently ahead of schedule, so it might
oh,
be
he's
able to
playing.
anyway.
I haven't seen any.
Oh, he's cleared to play, but the difference between being cleared to play and being
Right.
100%, I don't think he's there yet. But he's
Yeah.
a guy who, if he's available at final cutdowns, teams are going to put in claims. There's no way
Yeah.
that the Tennessee Titans are going to be able to get him on the practice squad.
Yeah.
So if they're
It would
going
be
to keep
another
him,
LeGarrette Blunt situation completely. So yeah, I see that happening. And then you've got the situation. I think that they're pretty well set. I think they know what they're going to do at their running back position. I noticed from the first week of camp to this week of camp, it did seem like Bishop Sankey's reps had increased, not significantly because Dexter McCluster is still on the field. He's still being used as a running back, as a wide receiver. He's electrifying. He looks good. They've got Sean Green. Sean Green is having a very nice training camp. Looks to be recovered from his injuries, but I think that you're going to see some Jackie Battle, some Antonio Andrews, some of the back end guys, and Jackie Battle seems to have the favorite to take that fourth, fifth, fourth running back spot because he's bulked up, he's big, and he's playing some fullback. They're going to maybe try to use him as a fullback, that fullback halfback kind of situation. And then you've got the receivers, and the main guys, Kendall Wright, Nate Washington. You're not going to see, I doubt you'll see Kendall or Nate very much. Justin Hunter, I'm not sure about. He's looking extremely well in training camp, but he really struggled last year with his hands catching the ball. Now, he's not this year. He's really making some nice plays and doing very. I'm not saying he hasn't dropped anything. They all have. And you're going to see that it's going to happen. Is he going to get a little bit more playing time just to make sure that he's getting acclimated? I think you might see him get rotated in just a little bit more because he's a second-year guy, and maybe they want to get him a little bit more reps. I don't think you're going to see him play significantly more. Definitely don't think you're going to see him play in the second half. But he's still a young guy, and
an
I
important
think
guy for that new coaching staff. I mean, if you look at
yes.
what Wisenhunt is like to do, both with the Cardinals and back when he's with the Steelers, it's a lot of 3 wide receiver, a lot of those big trees on the outside, and a slot guy. That's exactly what they could potentially have with Washington, Wright, and Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Hunter's kind of the missing piece for them. I mean, if he develops into the player that he has, I mean, he has the talent to be one of the better receivers in the NFL. If he develops
Mm-hmm.
into that, that totally changes that offense for
Oh
them.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it does. The tight end position, they're definitely set there. It's going to be Delaney Walker, Craig Stevens, and Taylor Thompson. Might you see Taylor Thompson play a little bit more like Justin Hunter because he's another younger guy entering his 3rd year, I believe, 2nd or third year, and he really sort of struggled last year. Yeah, when you think about that 3rd year because he was on the team with Matt Hasselbeck. So you might see him play, a little bit more. We talked a little bit about the secondary, some of those younger guys that you're going to play along the lines. And These are the two guys, a couple of the guys that I want to talk about. Taylor Lewan is a guy, the Titans obviously were high on him. They drafted him in the first round at the number 10 selection. While Andy Levitre was recovering, was unable to practice. He played guard. He's back to playing tackle, though he's played both positions. Might he play and get a lot of reps at one or both of those positions? I think that you might see that because we all know, if you followed the Tennessee Titans, they had devastating injuries along their offensive line a couple of seasons ago, and really, didn't. They were unable to recover. I mean, they had guys who stepped in and did the best that they could, but it really was a very trying season for them because of that. And then on the defensive line, you're going to see young guys like LeVar Edwards, Daquan Jones. By the way, I meant to ask you, you might know this. Is he related to Dayton Jones?
I don't think so. He might be related, though, to Chandler Jones, who I know is the brother of the UFC fighter.
Okay. Interesting.
So, and actually, so speaking of relatives, this is possibly the final thing we can get to before I have to go. Who wins the battle of the McRae brothers?
Ah, yeah. Yeah.
I completely forgot about that angle until I was looking at the depth charts. They played together at Central Florida. I would say probably that Justin McRae has the better chance of making a team just because the Packers have so many guys at at Jordan's exact position. Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting because they're both going to get a lot of playing time tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Jason, I know that you have to go, and see, I told you the hour always goes by fast, and so we've pretty much covered everything. But before I let you go, I want to get a final score from you.
It's a preseason game. I haven't thought about it.
I know, but I gotta ask.
14-17 or reverse. I don't know.
Okay. All right.
I'm terrible with scores for preseason games.
I am going to say that the Titans are going to win their first preseason game at home in front of the home crowd, and they are going to beat the Green Bay Packers 28-17.
That sounds like a good score to me.
So there you have it. Jason, thanks again. Before you go, come back in and tell everybody where they can find you and what's new and going on at the Acme Packing Company.
Well, you can find me on Twitter at JB Hirshhorn. That's HIRSCHHORN. I'm the senior writer and editor for Acme Packing Company. We are doing a ton of now preseason coverage. We're going to have a lot of stuff coming out tomorrow. We just released our 5 things to watch for. We're going to have after the game our takeaways article. So a lot of stuff going on about the game. And yeah, just if you're into Packers football, we're the best place to go.
Well, thanks for joining me again. I am Sharona. You can find me on Twitter at Sports by Sharona. This is The Extra Point. We come to you live usually every Friday night at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Have a very pleasant Friday evening. www.nationalgridironnetwork.com. Check it out. Have a pleasant Friday evening, and we'll see you next week. Go Titans.